What's up, football fans? It's your boy Aniello Piro from Mile High Sports, and we are back for another episode of the Football Friday Show right here on Mile High Sports digital stream, presented by our good friends over at SuperBook Sports. If you're looking for a new sports book to get in the mix, look no further than our friends over at SuperBook Sports. World-class odds makers, great odds, great betting selections, menu, the whole nine. Do yourself a favor and sign up with our friends over at SuperBook Sports. You can also find out a little bit more about them in the latest issue of Mile High Sports magazine. Just look for Mr. Russell Wilson on the cover. And get this, get up to a $1,000 bonus with our friends over at SuperBook Sports to get your season started. It's only week 2, plenty more to go in the regular season. Of course, the postseason on the horizon as well. And you're not just limited to football over at SuperBook Sports. You can bet the baseball. We got the playoffs coming up as well. NBA and NHL season around the corner as well. So do yourself a favor, guys. Get signed up with our friends over at SuperBook Sports, and away we go. All right, a good episode lined up for you this week, and I got my guy Josh Dover from Altitude Sports Radio set to join the program. Did a little segment with him earlier this week, talk a little Denver Broncos, get his opinion on that game against the Houston Texans, and also rehash some thoughts from that pitiful loss against the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, just a total I don't even know what to describe that. It's just a lack of preparation. I mean, week 1 jitters, whatever you might want to call it, but a disappointing loss for the Denver Broncos in that matchup week 1 in Seattle. We'll see if they can bounce back now against Houston, and a near double-digit favorite the Broncos are. So we'll break that game down in depth with my guy Josh Dover coming up here in a few minutes, and then I'll break it down and give you guys my official thoughts, picks, and predictions for that game here in a little bit. But thank you guys for tuning in. Appreciate you guys big time. After the fact, if you're watching this right around Friday afternoon, Friday evening, you can go to milehighsports.com. We'll have the full written primer up, which is essentially this show in written form. I'll also have this show available in podcast linked form as well in there. So if you want to re-listen to it, if you want to catch up on the conversation with Josh Dover, or if you just want to see the picks and the predictions and all that kind of stuff, you'll be able to do that on milehighsports.com. We do the primer every single week in addition to this Football Friday show. So a little bit of the visual aspect. We got the podcast form with the audio, and then the written element as well on milehighsports.com. We made out all right last week. Let's go over that. Let's start with the bad. The Carolina Panthers, man, they drive me absolutely insane. That was one of my favorite plays last week, playing them on the money line. I got it at a pick 'em, and I felt good because we saw the line move, Carolina -1, 1.5 as we got closer to kickoff there. And look, you got to tip your cap to the Browns, and it's on to next week. They got the Giants this week. The Panthers do. I don't have any plays in that game officially, but it was one of those situations I was disappointed there. So they did not come through. I thought when Baker drove them down the field, that might be it, but away we go. Matt Rule, Panthers. What a frustrating game that was. But we hit good on that Mike Tomlin-led defense as they covered the 6.5-point spread against the Cincinnati Bengals. And that was one sweaty game. Way sweatier than it needed to be. TJ Watt out for a little while, which will certainly affect my opinion of the Pittsburgh Steelers here moving forward. Just a little bit. I mean, we know he's the anchor of that defense. Minkah Fitzpatrick's also phenomenal. And I think Mike Tomlin's probably the best head coach in the league. So I'm not going to write off the Pittsburgh Steelers, but losing TJ Watt is certainly going to impact their value, or just how I look at them in general from a betting perspective as we move forward. But they came through for us last week against the Cincinnati Bengals. Felt like the world was on the Bengals. We went the other way. We took the points with Pittsburgh. And I mean, that defense was ferocious. So they came through for us. Another loss that we took, and I just got this one wrong. And I mean, it's not even that I got it. We did. We missed this one. The Dallas Cowboys offense just didn't show up. We were on Dallas +2.5, had that one in the written primer. Disappointing loss, but they did limit Brady to under 20 points. So that defense is stout, and I've got some thoughts on the Tom Brady-led Buccaneers for this week's matchup against the New Orleans Saints, so stay tuned for that one. And then on the quick leans in the betting primer, we did a good job. We hit on Baltimore -6.5, as well as the under 44 in that matchup, and then we were all over the Minnesota Vikings +1.5 over the Green Bay Packers. So all in all, an all right week 1. I know some people got absolutely crushed. I know some people that hit a home run with the week 1 betting. We're right near that 500 mark, which I will take for week 1 as we kind of get acclimated with what these teams are and who they might be as the season progresses. So all good stuff here as we get started on the week 2 installment of the Football Friday show. But again, if you're looking for a sports book to sign up with, or looking for another book to add to your betting mix, look no further than our friends over at SuperBook Sports. And if you're looking for a place to watch these games in person, you can head up to the Lodge Casino here in Colorado, up in Blackhawk, where you got the brick and mortar SuperBook location. And if you're in Las Vegas, you got to check out the mothership, the big SuperBook Sportsbook at the Westgate out there in Las Vegas. It is the best place to watch a sporting event with the betting. You got the food and drinks right behind you. They got the poker room over there. I love chilling in the poker room. It's a great time. So if you find yourself in Las Vegas, go ahead and check out the Westgate. If you're here in Colorado and you want to watch these games in person, the Lodge Casino is the place for you. And away we go. So did a little rehash of week 1. Let's look forward towards week 2, and let's go ahead and get Josh Dover in here. Here's my conversation with JD over at Altitude Sports Radio. Some general opinions on the week 2 slate. We go over a couple of games. Then, of course, focus in on the Denver Broncos. We'll play the interview with Josh, and then I'll come back, give you guys my official picks and predictions for what might go down this week, and away we go. Here's a conversation with Josh Dover. What is up, football fans, and welcome on back to the Week 2 installment of the Football Friday show right here on Mile High Sports, presented by our good friends over at SuperBook Sports. I'm your host, Aniello Piro. You guys can follow me on social media at Media by AP. And kind enough to give me a few minutes of his time before he goes on air, also a member of the SuperBook family. You might know him from Altitude Sports Radio. That is Mr. Josh Dover, and excited to get him on the program, talk a little Bronco football, a little NFL betting, and away we go. Josh, my man, how are we doing today?
I'm good, man. I'm fired up. A little Football Friday for you. We call it a funky Football Friday over here. Yeah. So we're fired up for today.
I like it, man. And let's start with the Denver Broncos. Before we look forward, let's look at what just happened with them, and obviously a pretty disappointing outcome against the Seattle Seahawks. I got that game wrong. I think a lot of people did. I didn't think Geno Smith would be as good as he looked. It was an interesting set of circumstances there for the Broncos. Nathaniel Hackett, not exactly lighting the world on fire in his coaching debut. What was your just overall reaction now to the Broncos 0-1? I don't think many people saw that coming off the bat.
Yeah, same. I mean, I thought the Broncos were going to roll. I was talking about over here like 30-10, 31-10, something like that. And it was not the case. That defense, unofficial count, missed 2,684 tackles in the first half. So that was bad. No tackling in the preseason. Couldn't fill gaps, couldn't shed tacklers, couldn't shed blockers. That was all bad. I blame Nathaniel Hackett 100% for that. He said, hey, the preseason doesn't matter, until it did. And it mattered in the regular season because they were not ready to go.
No, I agree with you. And I was having the debate with my guy, Cody Rourke, on the show, about should they play their guys in the preseason? And to me, it was less about playing everybody in the preseason. It was more the combination of a new head coach, a new quarterback, a new system, putting all of those things together and essentially, just expecting it to kind of all work right away in week 1. So I think they'll be fine. Where are you kind of at on your optimism level with the Broncos? They just looked like a team that hadn't really practiced, that had been a little bit sloppy against a team that was a little bit more prepared. I mean, I think they'll be fine long-term. What say you, Mr. Dover?
Yeah, I'm not worried. I said it's a disappointment, right? It's you expected so much, and because we didn't get to see anything during the preseason, our expectations as media members, as a fan base, were through the roof because we've been so desperate for the touch of a quarterback for 5 years. Finally get that person. And Russ was good, but just wasn't good enough. And that was my biggest thing. Aniello, you mentioned Coach Hackett. I get you want to empower a player. I talked to ESPN's Jeff Legwold yesterday. He said that. He wanted to empower his player. All right, that's cool, Coach. But you picked the wrong dude, man. You don't empower a kicker. You empower the quarterback you just gave $250 million to.
Yeah, it was just one of those circumstances that everything that went wrong kind of could have. And like I said, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it just for me comes down to a lack of preparation. There was a little bit of a deer in the headlights type of look with Hackett on the sidelines. I guess the one thing that was brought up to me too is why didn't Russ Russ was kind of looking around at Hackett, and I get he's your coach, but would Peyton Manning have not called the timeout there? I mean, we saw him on the broadcast calling 60 plus timeouts on the Manning cast, but if this is 6-7 years ago when Manning's running the show, or this was his first game, I think maybe Peyton is a little bit more conscious of that. It was a whole interesting dynamic, and I think that just feeds into lack of preparation, new system, new coach, new quarterback, the whole nine. Disappointing loss, and now the Broncos are going to have to try to steal a game over the course of the season.
Yeah, exactly right. That was one they're supposed to win. Now they're going to have to go get one that they weren't necessarily supposed to win. And that timeout point you just made is perfect, man. It's Peyton definitely would have called. That was what Richard Sherman's barking about on the internet after the game. And Russ said it. You don't want to ruffle feathers. I get a little bit of that. But Aniello, us in the media, the fan base, how much more respect would they have had today, win or lose, if Russ does call the timeout to simply go have a conversation with Hackett and out and on the sideline? That's it.
Right.
He could have just called the timeout. They could have stuck to their same stupid plan and missed the field goal, but Russ would have shown some face and some character, a little bit of backbone by calling a timeout on his own.
Yeah, it is what it is. It's week 1. You can't overreact too much. It's just, in this division, we got the Chiefs and the Chargers playing tonight. We'll see how that game shakes out. But, you really can't give any opportunities, right? You can't lose ground and whatnot. So we'll see how it affects the Denver Broncos. But before we look at this game against Houston, I'm curious, my man, you've been with SuperBook for quite some time, the good people over there. I know you've been to the mothership a few times in Nevada. What do you do for SuperBook? I know you do some video, social promotion for them. And how'd you get involved with them?
Well, a big shout out to Kristen Mackey, Mike Rigg. Those are
Go.
my people over there. And obviously we love Jake Hornigay and Murray and Hugland, all the guys over there that do it at the mothership that you mentioned. I just love being a part of the team. I'm an influencer, right? Is the term. Sounds weird to say, but I just post some videos. My last name's Dover. Fortunately, there's some cool prop bets where we go Dover unders on the prop bets. So we'll get them ahead of every single Broncos game. We'll go out to Blake Street. We've been trying to do some fun skateboarding stuff since I'm an old skateboarder guy. And I'm willing to embarrass myself on the internet. So fun videos like that.
I dig it. Good stuff. And I love SuperBook. Very forward thinking. If you guys haven't been to the mothership out there in Nevada at the Westgate Hotel and Casino, do yourself a favor. It's the best place to watch NFL football, in my opinion. And if you want the local experience of that, you can go on up to the Lodge Casino, where our friends over at SuperBook also have a brick and mortar location. But okay, JD, let's dive into this game against the Houston Texans. And Houston, let's start there as well. I think surprised some people, and I had Hoagland on the show last week, and he had mentioned how there was, some pretty respected bettors that came in and bet Houston against the spread, and they end up playing for the tie, which was weird, but they looked better than people expected, and I think that's an interesting dynamic entering this matchup against the Broncos this week.
Yeah, and look, I'm a kid from Indiana, so I'm a Colts fan. That was a huge disappointment for me, what they
I forgot
did
about
against
that.
the Colts. Yeah, it was heartbreaking watching that thing unfold. But, that's what you get when you have a 39-year-old quarterback not named Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, Houston's better than a lot of people thought. Lovie Smith kind of fell on a sword for that organization as a head coach for this year. And who knows what happens moving forward. But I like Davis Mills. That was a guy that I was saying, obviously, before the Russ stuff in Denver. Go get that dude in the third or fourth round, especially if you're going to go with a young coach like Hackett. If they weren't going to land Russ, that'd be a nice little relationship to develop and see what that could turn into. So I'm high on Davis Mills. I think this Broncos defense can force some turnovers on Davis, especially if Denver can get yourself a 7 to 10 point lead, Aniello, and then let Bradley Chubb, Randy Gregory, I've dubbed them as the Grub sacks if they can combine. And let those dudes pin their ear back like Vaughn and DeMarcus used to do. Get yourself a 10-point lead and play Denver Broncos football. They do that, they should handle the Texans pretty easily.
Yeah, we'll see it. It's interesting you mentioned a 10-point lead because 10 points actually happens to be the point spread for this matchup between the Denver Broncos and the Houston Texans. Looking at it right now on SuperBook, Denver laying the 10 points at home, minus 110 the price on both sides. Also got a total here of 44.5, minus 110 both sides. And minus 500 is the money line price for Denver to come back on Houston at 4-1 at plus 400. So look, the odds makers are telling you, Denver's probably a better team. And the interesting thing, as we kind of take it back to that matchup against Seattle as well, on paper, Denver absolutely should be a double-digit favorite or near it, right, in my opinion. But do they have the continuity to kind of warrant that, right? Because I ended up laying 6 points on, Monday night against Seattle. That came back to bite me in the rear end. And so now, I'm not going to lie, I have a little I have like a little buyer's remorse of like, do I want to be laying, one score, a touchdown plus with this team? And I know that it's Houston, but looking at a Texans team that just played Indianapolis tough, a team that people think should make the playoffs this year, that's where I get a little skittish. Where are you at in just your confidence level, new coaching staff, quarterback, the whole nine, to potentially lay a big spread like this?
See, I looked at it last night too, and the double digits always turns me off just a little bit, but I'm confident here. I'm with you. I had a little bit of buyer's remorse too. Luckily, some of the same game parlays, SuperBook offers gave me some of my money back there. But the 10 scares me a little bit, to be honest. I don't know that I'd run in. I like the over of 44 though, because Denver's not scoring 6. They're going to put 20 to 24 on the board this week. 27 is possible. And then if Davis Mills can put a couple of drives together, score a couple of touchdowns and a field goal, you're going to get to that 44. So that's what I'm looking at. I always put same game parlays together because it's just fun and keeps you engaged. But I don't know that I'd ride the minus 10. I'd like the over on the 44 though.
Yeah, I think I like that as well. And 44.5, if it's a lower number, and I think, there's some opportunity playing, like the difference between kicking at mile high level as compared to Seattle, where the air is super thick, is a tremendous difference. So, if you're taking a 64-yard field goal at altitude, if you're Brandon McManus, it's a lot different than kicking that field goal in Seattle. So I do think both sides, maybe some more long field goal opportunities. I definitely like the over in this game as well, at least as an early lean as I dive into some more of the numbers. And I got to be honest here, man. I think if I had to make a pick against the spread, I think that Davis Mills is better than people think, and I like Lovie Smith's defense. He's a defensive-minded head coach. I mean, look, and Matt Ryan, I know he's a little bit older and whatnot last week, but you still managed, he's still got some gas left in the tank to a degree. And I think Russell Wilson going through some of these growing pains. If I had to lean one way on a spread pick, I'd probably lean towards Houston here. I just haven't seen enough from this Broncos offense consistently through the one game to warrant me laying 10 points, at least in my mind right now.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And especially you got Quinn Miners who's going to be out. Justin Simmons goes on the IR, right? So the defense takes a little bit of hit. Graham Glasgow's there. And that was the big story. Oh, well, Graham didn't hear the play call. We still got pushed backwards 5 freaking yards, man. So the play was blown up no matter what. So I'm with you. I might take that too. Houston cover that 10 points and see Denver win by, 7 to 9 points.
And I know we live here, but that's the thing. When it comes to sports betting, like I'm not always just going to back the home team. Like if there's an opportunity to make some money on the home team, best believe I will. But when it's all said and done, like I'm about making money. And if it means I can bet against the Broncos and make some money, I might just have to do that. So we'll keep an eye on that front. You bring up Justin Simmons, though. And he's been kind of the emotional leader of that defense for 4 to 5 years now. I'm curious, like he's going to be out for quite some time, obviously against this for this matchup as well against Houston. How much stock do you put into that and potentially how it could alter Denver's game plan and their overall output on defense?
I mean, it's going to hurt a little bit for sure. I like Caden Stearns, so it's a young dude that could come in. He's a little bit more of a thumper than the coverage guy that Justin provides you, but Justin's one of the best in the league at it. So I don't know how much production drops. Coverage-wise, it does a lot. You still have PS2 who's going to cover and shut down an entire half of an field island. Quan Williams, I thought we'd see a little bit more out of him in that nickel spot in game one, and we didn't. And we'll see how effective he is in that spot and how much he's actually going to drop back into kind of that coverage setting without a guy like Simmons being around. So I don't think it hurts now. And what is it, San Francisco coming up in week 3. I'm not too intimidated by Trey Lance either. I think it's the latter part of those 4 to 5 weeks that Justin's going to miss that it could hurt the team.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. So this is an opportunity for Denver to get right, and I'm not going to lay, minus 500 on a money line play. I like them to win this game. I'm a little skittish on the 10. It's just a lot of points. That being, it's a home game. We know that Broncos country is going to be, I can't even imagine what that stadium is going to look like on Sunday, man. They have been waiting for this moment for like a half decade. So I guess, if you want to bet emotionally with your heart, if you're a Bronco fan, I don't necessarily hate the 10. I have a couple question marks in my head about what they looked like in week 1. They looked better in the second half, and I also have a little bit of respect for Houston. I don't think they're as bad as people think. I had Houston's over on their win total before the year at 4.5. Like, I think that they're a lot better than people think. So we'll see how that shakes out. But I don't know, man. I think let me ask you one more on the Broncos. Like, where are you at on Russ after the first game, too? We talked about it a little bit early on here. Like, are you still kind of like cool, calm, and collected with him, or, some question marks arise in your book?
I'm not worried. I mean, he had 340 yards, right? The touchdown should have probably thrown an interception in the end zone right there if that Seahawks safety could have corralled it. But I'm not too worried. I would have loved to see Russ call that timeout and take a little bit more command. The one thing I'm not worried on Russ's part, but maybe it's a Hackett Russ sort of situation. Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton didn't see a target through the first quarter and really took a half a quarter in the second there to get it to him. You got to find the football for those guys earlier, just for momentum. Let them get a feel of what the game's going to be. And they, for some reason, haven't had a wide receiver screen since, RIP DT was around here. I'd love to see Cortland just take a step back, put his foot in the ground, catch a football, and have a couple of those guards and running backs out swinging for him. So that was really my only concern offensively outside of the fumbles. But get those guys involved earlier so that you can, target them later in the game when it's key moments.
Yeah, no, I agree. We'll see how it shakes out for the Broncos here in week 2 against the Houston Texans. As always, get your bets in with our friends over at SuperBook. I got Josh Dover from Altitude Sports Radio sitting in with me here for a couple minutes. Okay, let's go rapid fire here through a couple of the other games. We got a matchup of 1-0 teams that I think is going to be one of the better matchups in week 2. The Miami Dolphins against the Baltimore Ravens. This game is in Baltimore. You got the Ravens laying 3.5 points, so the key hook there, laying just over a field goal. Miami looked impressive, though, in week 1 against the Bill Belichick New England Patriots. I'm curious, where are you at on both of these teams?
I'm intrigued by Miami. That's what I'm going to call it right now. Okay. I'm not buying Miami yet, but I'm keeping an eye on Miami. That's what I'm going to look at. I want to see it a little bit more. Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, obviously monsters, but the question is, Tua, what do they do? And I'm riding with Baltimore a lot this season, Aniello. I think Lamar being, in his contract situation that he's in, he's got some chips on his shoulders, some stuff to prove. I'm riding with what they're doing. And they changed their whole offensive system. They're going back to what they did when he was the MVP, and that's going to pay dividends. So I like Baltimore to win, to cover, Bet a lot of Baltimore in this game. I like them.
So you're fading a little bit of the hype from Miami then after their initial win against New England. I agree with that. I'm already holding a Lamar Jackson MVP ticket at 20-1. Put that one out on Twitter. He was like 8th or 9th on the odds board preseason. I was like, for somebody who's 25 entering a contract year with the chip on his shoulder, like after his worst statistical year, I'll take the buyback price on that one. So I think I agree with you. I think I want to go ahead and fade Miami in this one. I'll do a little bit more research. I like Tyreek Hill. I like Waddle as well. And I like McDaniel, the Smoky Hill high school graduate here locally.
That's right. In Colorado. Yeah. He's a sneakerhead. I love that guy.
How do you not like him, right? So I'm a big Baltimore Lamar Jackson believer on that front. So we'll keep an eye there. And then let's do the Monday night game, or one of the two Monday night games. I think two teams that made some strong impressions at first glance being the Philadelphia Eagles and the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota with an outright win against the Green Bay Packers. And then, of course, Philadelphia taking care of business against an improved Detroit Lions team here. I think that this is going to be a fun matchup. I'm curious. It's close to a pick'em here. Do you side one way or the other at first glance between Philly and Minnesota?
I kind of lean towards Philly, but you're right that the pick'em is right there, so you're going to get some good odds at SuperBook for it. But I'm liking Philly a lot this year. I like Jalen Hurts. I think he's a dude that a game manager almost seems disrespectful. I don't think that's a bad term by any means, but he can do a little bit more than manage the game. And they've built such a solid core around him. Philly's going to win that division. They're going to be a playoff team. I just don't know how deep into the playoff they're really going to be able to make a run. But I like Philly here. I'm not a huge Kirk Cousins guy. I know he produces numbers, but he's a 500 quarterback. He is terrible in prime time. That's something you got to keep in mind when you're making your bets too, because he is awful in primetime games. I'm rolling with the Eagles. I like him to cover, even if it's a pick 'em. I'm going to go there. I like Philly.
No, I like it as well. And looking at the odds right here on SuperBook Sports, Minnesota catching 2 points on the road, plus 115, the money line price for Minnesota, minus 135, the price for Philadelphia. And remember, minus 110 is the house's number. So my rule of thumb is like minus 150 and below for a straight bet. That's how I try to go about it. So that minus 135 there, if you want to lean towards Philly, not a bad price in my book whatsoever. But I think that's going to be an interesting matchup. I think Philadelphia's defense profiles well against Kirk Cousins as well. And you mentioned the primetime aspect of Kirk, always something to worry about. One more super quick one before we get you out of here. We got two all-time coaches, or at least in the modern sense, going up against each other. New England and Pittsburgh. This is an interesting one. I'm curious. You lean with one coach over the other?
Yeah, New England is interesting. I actually read something last night or recently this week talking about maybe Robert Kraft wanting Bill to retire and be a consultant if things don't go well this year. So I think there's a lot on the line in New England for a season. Mac coming off, a back injury, but says he's fine. They didn't see anything in an MRI. Man, I don't want to bet against Mike Tomlin. You know what I mean? And I do want to bet against Bill Belichick. So this one, this is where they get us, right? Aniello, is we start to bet with our hearts and our heads and our feelings instead of what we actually think can make some money. So they'll probably get me on this one. I just can't bet for the Patriots and Bill Belichick. I'm going to roll with Mike Tomlin and the Steelers.
And I was on Tomlin and the Steelers last week when they were catching 7 points against Cincinnati. What a wild game that was. Worked out all right for me. I just think the loss of TJ Watt, that's the one thing for me that, as I was watching that game, I was like, man, if they don't have TJ Watt out there, as good as Minkah Fitzpatrick is in the secondary, that can hinder them. I'm still split on that one, but that is definitely a game I'll have my eye on because I want to watch a Mike Tomlin-led team going up against a Bill Belichick-led team. Belichick's 70 years old. We're not sure how much longer he's going to be around, in a coaching capacity in that sense. So we'll see how it shakes out. But he is Josh Dover, Altitude Sports Radio. You are you're on from 10 to 2 p.m. these days, it appears?
10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Yes, sir. Every day over here.
Awesome stuff. And how long you been with Altitude now, man? It's been probably 5-6 years, dare I say?
Yeah, 6 years, 6.5 years coming up on something like that. Ever since they started, basically they started and I got hired. I haven't been fired yet, so good.
You're doing something right. No, I remember when you brought it up to me in the Nuggets press box when I was still covering the team on a day-to-day basis. You're like, yeah, we're launching this new radio station, all this stuff. And it's been cool to watch your career grow. And I'm happy that you are a part of the SuperBook Sports family now as well. So thank you so much for a few minutes, my man. I know you got to get on here and I'll let you go, but thanks so much.
Yeah, no, same back to you. I always watch your career. You've been killing it, man, as one of the young up-and-comers in the game. So I love seeing what you're doing from afar.
Appreciate it, man. Just doing my best. Josh Dover, Altitude Sports Radio, catch him from 10 to 2 on the Altitude Sports Radio channel. He also does some Nuggets coverage. And where can they follow you on social media, my friend?
At Joshua Dover on the Twitter machine, and then Instagram if you want to see an old guy drink Twisted Teas and skateboard. It's at Joshua Dover Radio. Follow me there.
Perfect. Good stuff. Josh, thank you so much. We'll do it again soon, all right?
Appreciate you, man. Yeah, for sure.
Right, there was the conversation with Josh Dover over at Altitude Sports Radio, also a influencer with the SuperBook Sports family, and that's one of my favorite parts about SuperBook, especially if you're here in Colorado, as I am working for Mile High Sports. Being friends with some of the other media folk here, is there is a very homegrown, organic approach to sports betting going on with our friends over at SuperBook. Whether it's Josh Dover, some of the other guys that you might see on this show throughout the NFL football season, we're going to do a good job of trying to get different faces, different voices that are helping build the SuperBook brand, not only here in Colorado but around the country. I mean, they're my favorite sports book in town, and I can't say it enough. If you're in Las Vegas, if you're a sports fan, a sports bettor, you got to go check out the mothership out there at the Westgate. It is just, it's the top experience for watching and betting these games, man. I mean, I've been out there, 2-3 times, and it has been, every time I go out there, I'm more and more impressed. It's seriously so great. So again, guys, if you're looking for a new sports book to sign up with or get in the mix, you can't go wrong with our friends over at SuperBook Sports. A real different, organic, localized approach to sports betting in each of their respective markets, especially here in Colorado. And away we go. So thanks to my friend Josh Dover for joining me. And let's go ahead and lock in some wagers on my end here. And I got 3 games that we'll go over in addition to the Denver Broncos game. And let's start with a team that lost us some money last week, or, we bet against them, and, how that all shook out. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers in New Orleans to take on the New Orleans Saints. And I think this is a fascinating matchup. New Orleans has always been a thorn in Brady's side ever since Brady joined the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 4 matchups for Tom Brady against the New Orleans Saints as a member of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he's winless in all 4 of those matchups. Now, some of you might be thinking, Tom Brady, the GOAT, he's eventually going to push through, get a victory. That could very well be the case. I think Tampa could win this game, despite some of the recent history and the success that New Orleans has had here. But looking at some of the odds, you're getting Tampa right around -2.5. I'm curious, some injury questions with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I wonder if we see this line maybe move a little bit closer to 3, depending on, some injury status reports of guys like Mike Evans, Julio Jones. We know what Chris Godwin's obviously dealing with as well. Offensive line issues there to a degree. But taking a look at it, -2.5, the price right now on SuperBook for this game in favor of the road team being the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, -110 on both sides. So you can catch the 2.5 points here with New Orleans at home. 44 is your total. We've seen this come crashing down just a little bit. And -140, the price for Tampa on the money line, +120, the price for New Orleans. And I'll come right out and say it. I think if I was to make a bet on Tampa in this game, I'd probably just lay the juice at the -140. It's a fair price. And my general rule of thumb is like -150, -155 and below. That's where I try to float. Obviously, you want to stay as close to -110 as possible, and hopefully, pick and choose your dogs respectively. Try to get a little plus money action in there as well. Enticing price for New Orleans here at +120. It's just one of those situations where I am a big trends bettor. I know that turns some people off. It's worked in my favor. All right. Worked out last night for us with the Chargers against the Chiefs, and what a game that was. Hope Justin Herbert's okay. But I'm also just, it's a limited sample size here, and there's still just so many questions and so much commotion around Tom Brady, right? The family stuff off the field, just coming back after retiring and then unretiring it. There's still some of these question marks. And to call a spade here as well, that Dallas defense really did a good job of limiting Tom Brady last weekend. And I think this New Orleans defense has played him exceptionally well. I think they'll continue to do that here. It's always been a tough matchup for Brady. They managed to get pressure, good secondary here. Mike Evans has not played well historically against New Orleans either. And we know, he's the top option right now for Tampa and Brady out there. So it's one of those situations where Tom Brady's never won against New Orleans. This game is in New Orleans, where the Saints have a pretty strong home field advantage. And I think that the Saints team is better than people think. I mean, my guy Cody Rourke, who's my co-host on the Afternoon Drive program right here on Mile High Sports Radio, he picked the Saints to win the division. I thought he was crazy. I definitely picked Tampa to win the division. But, listening to Cody, and I've also got a couple of other friends, I'm talking about you, Fish, and Andrade, some of my other buddies growing up, that are just absolute Jameis Winston truthers. And I have not necessarily on the train just yet, but I do think there's some value here, a nice price to be had with New Orleans in this matchup. We saw them come back over Atlanta last week. What were they down double digits entering the fourth quarter? I believe Winston put up 14, 17 points in the fourth quarter, something along those lines. Michael Thomas looks like a legitimate wide receiver 1. I just think that the Saints team at home catching points is always going to be worth a look. And I understand that it's Tom Brady. I understand it's the Buccaneers, one of the better teams in the NFC entering this season. But I do think that there are some question marks with this iteration of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, at least this early in the season. And I do think the reality of the situation is with Tampa, obviously they want to go out there and win every game that they can. They're 1-0. They want to be 2-0. But I think we've seen Brady struggle against this team, and I'm not saying he's going to wave the white flag by any stretch of the imagination, but if they do run into some frustrations, and even if they do lose Tampa, right, I don't think it's going to knock them down on my rankings about where they are in the NFC as a whole. Like, I think Tampa will be just fine. This matchup in particular, divisional matchup as well, has just been a tough one for them to try to figure out. New Orleans happens to match up very, very well against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So a couple of trends here, even predating Tom Brady back to the Jameis Winston era. Tampa Bay 1-7 against the spread of their last 8 head-to-head meetings against the New Orleans Saints. The over 4-1 in the last 5 meetings in New Orleans. Buccaneers 2-5 against the spread their last 7 in New Orleans. And we mentioned the other one. Brady has yet to beat the Saints as a member of the Bucs. And the big one, obviously, with that being the case, Saints have been the underdog in all 4 of those games, so the underdog is 4-0 in the last 4 head-to-head matchups here. Here's kind of a random one that you can't really put too much stock into, but it's more of some historical trends with these respective teams. The Saints are 0-5 their last 5 games played in week 2, and Tampa is 5-0 in their last 5 games played in week 2, and that's against the spread, excuse me. So New Orleans, the last 5 years, week 2, have not covered the spread. The last 5 years, Tampa's covered 5 in a row in week 2. So if that's something that gets you thinking or feeling one way or the other, run with that as you may. I'm going to go ahead and lean towards New Orleans here. And there's a slight public 56% of the dollars right now coming in on New Orleans compared to 56% of the dollars on Tampa is what I was seeing before I recorded this, and 44% on New Orleans. I think a lot of people are expecting Brady to essentially right his wrongs against this New Orleans team. That could be the case, but we saw this New Orleans defense, what was it, 9-0 last time they played last season. They do a good job of confusing Tom Brady, and they can get pressure, right? We saw the Dallas Cowboys defense with Micah Parsons and company last night get home to Brady a couple of times, and that made a tremendous difference. So I just think historically this is a tough place to play for any team, knowing it's a divisional matchup and knowing that there's some demons here for Tom Brady. I lean towards New Orleans just a little bit. I like him at 2.5. And like I said, I'm curious just based off how the injury stuff works out here for Tampa. If they get some positive feedback on the injury front about the receivers and offensive linemen, Leonard Fournette popped up on the injury report as well. I think you can see maybe this line float up towards Tampa -3. And if you can get the 3, you got to hammer New Orleans there. We all know that 3 is an absolutely critical number. I mean, just look at last night's game. You got we ended up covering with the Los Angeles Chargers as they lose by 3, but we had them 3.5, and that's probably part of some public steam. We saw that line get up to 4.5. I bet it early in the week at 3.5. That was enough for me. And it's just one of those situations where if you can catch 3 and maybe even 3.5, and I don't really recommend buying a half point, but I could, live with it here in this situation. I just think that historically this has been a good matchup for New Orleans, and I think that'll continue here. I just wasn't overly impressed with the Tom Brady-led offense last week against the Dallas Cowboys, and had Dak Prescott and company showed up, I mean, that game could have gone a different way. It's just the Cowboys offense was nowhere to be found. So I think at the end of the day, this has been a good spot to make some money fading Tom Brady. Maybe he's going to right his wrongs and come out and, light the world on fire and play well against New Orleans. But that just hasn't been the case when Tom Brady's been a member of the Buccaneers. Again, Bucs 1-7 against the spread their last 8 meetings against the Saints, and the Bucs are 2-5 ATS their last 7 meetings in New Orleans. I'm going to go follow those trends. I like the New Orleans Saints this week. I'll take them. I'll take the points 2.5, looking for a 3. Don't hate a money line play either, but I'll play it safe. I can trust Jameis Winston enough. That's a hard thing actually for me to say, but I think he can play well enough to keep them in this game. And the one thing you got to say about Jameis Winston, he can capture lightning in a bottle. So let's see what he can do. I'm big on Michael Thomas right now. Obviously, they've got some other talent scattered throughout that offense, and I think this New Orleans defense has been a thorn in Brady's side. I think they continue, if you can limit Brady to a couple of scores and, essentially play if that is New Orleans playing last week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, are going to win that game, right? And you can't really do that apples to apples comparison. But I do think, as we said here at the beginning, there's enough question marks with Tom Brady, in my opinion, and this Tampa Bay team right now that I'll lean towards a New Orleans team catching points at home that had a pretty monumentous momentum victory over the division rival Atlanta Falcons. So let's take the points with the Saints. That's my first play of the day, and you can read that in the primer on MyLifeSports.com after the fact. Another trend that I pulled from Action Network, week 2 dogs that have failed to cover in week 1. So this fits the mold of the New Orleans Saints. Week 2 dogs that have failed to cover in week 1, 56, 32, and 2 against the spread since 2005. Again, week 2 dogs that failed to cover in week 1, 56, 32, and 2. That's covering at 63.6% of the time since 2005 by an average of 1.17 points per game. So I'm going to lean towards the Saints here as we get started with a little underdog play against the spread. Speaking of underdogs, let's keep it rolling. Another underdog that I like, and it's actually interesting because there's a ton of public money coming on this team catching double digits. That is the Atlanta Falcons. And I'm not really sure Atlanta's a team that I've ever really trusted with my money. I don't think I really bet Atlanta, probably bet against them time and time again last year. I'm not sure I ever backed them myself, but they're catching 10.5 points on the road in Los Angeles against the Rams. And the Rams, it's not a full buy, but after opening the season on Thursday Night Football, I've had some time to prepare for this matchup. Sean McVay had the opportunity to essentially just kind of get locked in and watch this matchup last Sunday, I should say, as they didn't play. But in my opinion, this is just simply too many points for Los Angeles Rams team that has question marks on the offensive side of the ball and to the defensive side of the ball to a degree against an Atlanta Falcons team that I think can be underrated and I think has the ability to put up points and stay in these games early in the season when they're a little bit of a lesser known commodity, right? You got Marcus Mariota, you got Arthur Smith. They're loaded on offense with high upside talent in Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Cordell Patterson playing the hybrid role as well. I just think that this is one of those situations where when you got an underdog catching double digits on the road, really just an underdog catching double digits anytime in the NFL, you have to give it a look. And I'm just not sold on this Los Angeles Rams team right now. I mean, outside of Cooper Kupp, their wide receiving core is a little thin. I mean, Allen Robinson looked awful against Buffalo in the first week. I think Atlanta's defense is a little underrated by the public. And I think the Falcons as a team, I'm not trying to say the Falcons are going to make the playoffs or they're this great team, but I think they can keep it within 10.5. This is a backdoor cover watch for me as well. Maybe the Rams take their foot off the gas a little bit as this game plays out. But it is one of those situations where when I look at some of the question marks on the Ram offense, question marks in the sense of can they run up a score maybe as easily as they have been in the years past, right? I think that Atlanta, while they're not the best team in the NFL, there's still some question marks with them. They're kind of like hiding behind this shroud of mystery to a degree. And I think there's some value with that, right? I think the general public just writes off the Falcons after they get off Matt Ryan. And I think that there'll be some value betting the Falcons early in the year. They covered the spread last week against a good New Orleans team and they probably should have won that game. And I'm not saying they're going to win this game against the Rams, but you're going to give me double digits with this Falcons team that I think can, play some good defense and has some weapons for Marcus Mariota on offense. And again, I like the aspect of the mystery with this Falcons team. I think you only have a 1-game sample size if you're Sean McVay. I mean, you're not going to come up with the wizarding game plan that you would if you have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 games worth of film with these guys. This is the second game that we're going to see of this Atlanta Falcons team. I think there's some value here on the Atlanta Falcons. And at the end of the day, I just think this is simply too many points. And I think the general public is expecting the Rams. I mean, the dollars don't indicate it, but I think just most gut fan, I've talked to a couple of friends, most football fans out there just think after a bad week 1 performance, having the extra time off, being at home here for the second consecutive week, I think a lot of people just expect the Rams to have a perfect game plan and stop a lesser opponent in the perceived eyes of some people. I don't think that's going to necessarily be the case. Maybe they come out to an early lead in the first quarter, first half, but I think this is a prime backdoor cover candidate. And I just think Atlanta's maybe a little bit better early in the season than people indicate, a little bit of a question mark, if you may. So I think it's too many points. No Super Bowl loser has gone 0-2 to start the season since the 2014 and 15 Seahawks, winner or loser, that is. So no Super Bowl winner or loser has started 0-2 straight up since 2014-15. That was the Seahawks. I don't think that'll be the case. I like the Rams to win this game. I'm just not sure they'll win it by 11 points. That's kind of how I'm looking here. Talked about the wide receiver connections, and it's just one of those situations. Here's an interesting trend that I picked up. I believe this was either from Action or Covers. Matthew Stafford has started 190 games in his NFL career. His worst loss against the spread was as a 9.5-point favorite at home against the Giants with the Lions, and that was back in 2013. So we don't know if Stafford's completely healthy. There were some interesting throws there last week. You would think Atlanta's going to game plan for Cooper Kupp. Where is Cam Akers? We don't even know what's going on with their receiving or with their running back core. Like I said, Allen Robinson didn't look all that good. I think there's enough question marks with this Rams offense that I'm okay taking the 10.5 points with a little bit of a, mystery team here potentially in the Atlanta Falcons. I just think 10.5 points, way too much. And here's another trend I picked up from the Action Network. Since 2016, teams to play in the Eastern time zone that then play in the Pacific time zone the following week are 58, 38, and 5 against the spread. That's covering at a 60% rate, and they cover by an average of 2.7 points per game. Again, a team that lives and plays in the East Coast playing in the Pacific time zone the next week, 58, 38, and 5 against the spread, covering 60% of their games. So that's a decent trend with a big sample size here as well. No home field advantage, almost like a negative home field advantage for the Rams playing in that building. They'll travel well, Atlanta. I think there's enough mystery with them. Marcus Mariota, good offense. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, high upside players. I think they can keep this within 10.5 points. It's a double-digit spread for a team that I think is a little bit better early on than people think. And I just think that the Rams are maybe due for a little bit of a Super Bowl hangover. Maybe they come out and wipe the floor. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I like the Falcons this week. So moving along. And this was an interesting slate. So we'll go with our first favorite here, but I wasn't really feeling a lot of these favorites. And it was one of those slates where I had some question marks. And the final play here is actually a Monday night game between the Eagles and the Vikings. And I like the Eagles to win this game, -1.5. Let's get some updated numbers here for you guys on this matchup. It's the final Monday night game, I want to say, of this week. Yeah, and it's actually moved here in favor of Philadelphia. Now they're laying 2. They were laying 1.5 earlier this week. So Philly laying 2, Minnesota catching 2 points on the road. Plus 115 money line price for Minnesota, -135 the price for Philly. I don't mind that there. And 49.5 is your total for 2 perceived explosive offenses, although we saw 2 perceived explosive offenses in the Chiefs and Chargers play last night, and that game went under. But what more do I have to say other than Kirk Cousins in primetime? It's just one of those situations, and I'll kind of give some more thoughts on Twitter. Be sure to follow me out there at Media by AP as we get closer to this game. Minnesota 2-5 their last 7 games to Philadelphia, and I also just think this is a trust sell high spot for me on Minnesota. We were on them last week. They came through for us big time against Green Bay. A little bit of an emotional high for this team. Justin Jefferson looked like he could do no wrong. Kirk Cousins looked dynamite, and now we go to a spot where historically Cousins and the Vikings have let people down historically here. So I like the idea of looking at Philly. I think that the Eagles are a pretty damn good team. If I hate to say that as, somebody who has a team in the NFCs, but it is one of those situations where Jalen Hurts is looking good. I mean, he's a dual threat quarterback, being able to throw the ball. We saw his vertical passing look good against Detroit. He can also run the ball out of the pocket as well. So I just think this is an opportunity. I got to see the Vikings prove it to me before I can bet him in a spot like this, especially on Monday Night Football. Before he played the Bears in consecutive years on Monday Night Football, Kirk Cousins was winless on Monday Night Football. And then he got 2 years in a row, he drew the Bears playing for the Vikings and picked up 2 victories. 2014 to 2019 on Monday Night Football, Kirk Cousins 0-7 straight up and 0-7 against the spread. The last couple of years, he's 2-0 straight up, 2-0 against the spread. But again, those games came against the Chicago Bears, so do with that as you may. I think Philly's good. They've got good defense, and they play a good zone. And we know that Kirk Cousins can struggle against zone. They can play good cornerback coverage as well, Philly. I just think that it's one of those situations where I like Kevin O'Connell. I love Justin Jefferson. I think that Minnesota's a force to be reckoned with, but I'm not going to take the points if it's not a field goal or greater, right? Because essentially, you're telling me I can get Philly potentially -135 here on the money line or lay 2, I'd much rather do that. I feel like Philly's just a little bit more consistent. Home opening game for Philadelphia as well, loaded with expectations this season. You know that the Eagle fan is going to be loud and proud, cheering on their fan base, and I just don't trust Kirk Cousins in primetime, regardless of the options he has on the offensive side of the ball. As good as Jefferson, Thielen, and Dalvin Cook are, I can't trust Minnesota here just yet. So I lean towards the Eagles in this game. I think Jalen Hurts will show up. I know he hasn't played well in the big spot sometimes, especially at home, which is strange, but I think it's a little bit of a new-look Eagles team this season. I'll look towards the Philadelphia Eagles to take care of business over the Minnesota Vikings on Monday Night Football. So those are my 3 plays here early on for the betting primer here on the Football Friday show presented by our friends over at SuperBook Sports. Just some quick leans, which you'll be able to read about in the betting primer as well. Miami catching 4 is interesting against Baltimore. I do like the Detroit Lions this week over the Washington Commanders. Those are a couple of games, and I do lean towards the under in the Jets and the Browns, 39.5. But you tell me how those 2 teams are scoring points. Joe Flacco's an atrocity. Jacoby Brissett, I mean, they were just running the ball down, the Panthers' throat last week with Nick Chubb. I'm looking towards the under in Jets and Browns, and away we go. So let's put a bow on it here with the Denver Broncos, and let's get some updated odds for you guys, courtesy of our friends over at SuperBook Sports. And it's a new-look Broncos team because Nathaniel Hackett, Russell Wilson, and company, I can't use really any of the past for the Broncos to kind of try to dictate how I like them in a betting matchup this year, at least right now. And so, none of the trends are really valid in my opinion. I just think that, much like Atlanta, there's some question marks with this Broncos team, but it's a massive bounce back spot for them. I mean, that was a disappointing loss for the Broncos. And the reason it was disappointing, not just because of the late game execution, not just because of the fumbles in the red zone, but because of the division that you play in, right? And I had the Chiefs winning the division entering the season. That was my pick. You could go check it out on Twitter at Media by AP if you don't believe me. But it was one of those situations where against Seattle, you kind of lost a game you should have won. And you can't really afford to do that when you're going up against a gauntlet of a division with teams like the Chargers, the Raiders, the Chiefs, right? So now the Broncos are going to have to make up ground. They're probably going to have to try to steal a game that they probably otherwise should have won, that being against the Seattle Seahawks. And it's sitting at 10 right now. Denver at home, their home opener against the Houston Texans. Denver laying 10 points, total of 45, minus 500, the price on the money line for Denver, plus 400, so 4-1 odds to come back on Houston. And using no trends, just talking football here. I'll close even my laptop just so we could, you and me and the screen talk football. You guys get to listen to it. You let me know what you think. I can't trust this Broncos team. And I think I find myself having a little bit of buyer's remorse. I ended up I'm square. It was filthy casual sports better with what I did last week. I bought into the hype. I was drinking the Kool-Aid. All the sharps, the smart money was on Seattle last week. I laid 6.5 with the Denver Broncos. I'm very smart, as you can tell. After that line opened at 3.5, which is ridiculous. I was texting with the people over at SuperBook. That was where the line should have been the whole time. You saw the line open 3.5 and work its way up to 6.5 based off public steam alone. So it's one of those situations, and then also, Seattle's quarterback situation. So I have a little bit of buyer's remorse with the Broncos last week. I think the first half against Seattle, as we talked about with Dover, it just looked like a team, the Broncos, that didn't play in the preseason with a new coach, a new offensive scheme. They just looked completely sloppy across the board. Completely different team the Broncos were in the second half. Put the clamps on Seattle, lose the game, but looked a lot better. So as I sit here and I look at this matchup against Houston, I think that Houston's actually a lot better than people think. I played their over on their win total 4.5 before the season. I think Davis Mills has got some talent. Let's see what Damian Pierce does if they want to give him some touch. They got Brandon Cooks on the outside as well. And they, tied last week with the Indianapolis Colts, and they probably could have won that game had Lovie Smith not been so conservative there at the end. You got a defensive-minded coach in Lovie Smith too. I think that Houston Texans defense is all right. I just haven't seen enough continuity and chemistry from this Denver Broncos offense to warrant laying 10 points. So if I had to make a pick against the spread here, and I'm not laying minus 500 on the money line, I'd probably take the Houston Texans plus 10 against the spread. I just haven't seen enough from Denver to warrant them running up a score, whether it's going to be blunders, fumbles, Russell Wilson still developing that chemistry with his offensive players, some questions at offensive line. You look at, no Quinn Miners for the Broncos this week, it looks like. And then look at defense. No Justin Simmons, the emotional leader of that defense as well. I think the Broncos are going to be a good team. I think the Broncos are going to be just fine this season. I had them as a double-digit win team before the year. I think they'll win this game and probably do it handedly. I just don't think it'll be by 10 points. I could see them winning maybe with 4 points, 7 points, right around there. I just think Lovie Smith knows how to play a conservative-style game. He's going to take his field goals when he can get them. And I like this Houston team maybe a little bit more than the general public does. So in regards to the Denver Broncos, my lean against the spread for this matchup would have to be with the Houston Texans taking the points at plus 10. And, we'll see how that shakes out. But, the Broncos fans are going to be loud and proud. I just haven't seen enough in the first game. And I think there's still some question marks, even more so now on Hackett, Russell Wilson, and maybe even a little bit of added pressure. That's the other dynamic is how do the Broncos look with, after losing this week 1? And you still got all your offensive weapons, but we know the offensive line has some question marks. Mentioned Justin Simmons. I just haven't seen enough from this Broncos team, and I'm not confident enough in their coaching staff and their player personnel to go out there and really flex their muscles against a team like Houston that I think can play some good defense, shorten the game up a little bit, and lean on their run game. So that's where I sit on that matchup between the Denver Broncos and the Houston Texans. But that'll do it. I think we kind of ran through all the big games. Like I said, there will be more detail at milehighsports.com where you could read my betting primer. And away we go. So once again, guys, if you're looking for a sports book to sign up with, look no further than our friends over at SuperBook Sports. They do a great job. You can check them out over at the Lodge Casino. Download the app, get the bets in, and you can check them out at Mile High Sports Magazine here as well. On the latest cover, we got Mr. Russell Wilson. And, you'll get a bonus up to $1,000 when you sign up, deposit, and wager today, courtesy of our friends over at SuperBook. So week 2 is upon us. Let's go ahead and make some money. Check out the betting primer on milehighsports.com. You'll be able to find the rerun of this show in there, as well as the same show in podcast forms. If you want to listen to it while you're watching college football or, while you're cleaning the house on Saturday, walking the dog, whatever it might be, you'll be able to find that in there as well. But thank you guys so much. Josh Dover, thank you very much for joining us too. We'll have some other SuperBook folk on the program, hopefully next week, and it'll be a good one. So thank you guys so much. Week 2 is upon us. Let's go ahead and make some money, and